It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. You can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver on Wednesdays, but Mondays are for me to talk about monster movies. Some months ago, I covered the indie film Bong of the Living Dead. I mentioned how I came across it during one of my now many Horror Hound weekends that I've attended. This week's episode of Monster Mondays, we'll talk about another of those convention finds. Well, sort of. Allow me to tell the story of how I came across the extremely funny Bloodsucka Jones. While attending the 2019 Days of the Dead convention here in Indianapolis, my Film Seizure co-host Jason pointed out a table and said that definitely looked like something that would be up my alley. I saw the banner that read Bloodsucka Jones. I looked back at Jason and I said, Yeah, I think that's something that's up my alley. So I moseyed on over to check out the merch on the table, and there sat writer and director Justin Armao. He had a table full of various things. He had Blu-ray discs of Bloodsucka Jones versus the Creeping Death, some various character pins, some cards, and what have you, the typical merch table. And I let him know that in so many words, I had a sneaking suspicion that he was selling something that I could really dig. Now, people who know me know that I've been to many conventions, now, and mostly comic book conventions, but still, I have a kind of awkward anxiety about going up to a table of an indie publisher or, well, really any table that I may not make a purchase at. Most of the time, if I'm at a show, I go right up to a table that I feel fairly confident that I'll be making a purchase. And most of that's because I feel really bad telling somebody I'm not going to make a purchase when they've kind of poured their blood, sweat, and tears into a project or self-publishing something or making their own movie. It's one of those things that I just hate to walk away empty-handed, but I may not necessarily want what they're selling. I know the honesty would probably mean more to them, but you get my pick. You get my point. It's not something that I like to tell somebody when I know the kind of work they've probably put into that. But that said, I felt relatively good about the Bloodsucka Jones table. But the best thing was that Armao was fairly unassuming and certainly not pushy at all. And it didn't help that he was selling his Blu-rays of the movie that he had there for like $10 with those cool little character pins for like $5 each. So I was pretty much on board. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the movie that I purchased, watched, and laughed my ass off while watching was an actual sequel. There was another Bloodsucka Jones out there. Now, I don't think Bloodsucka Jones versus the Creeping Death was even over the first time that I watched it, and I had already gone to Amazon and gotten a copy of the first Bloodsucka Jones on the way. And that's the movie I'm going to cover and talk about this week. Bloodsucka Jones made its way to DVD in 2014. Inside the DVD's case, it states that the saga of Bloodsucka Jones began on April Fool's Day of 2008. The thought was, hey, we can make a movie. How hard can it be? Well, they discovered that it's about 6 years hard. And it may have taken a lot longer than Armao thought it would take to make the movie, but it didn't mean that anybody phoned in anything. There was over 150 people that worked on this movie. And that's just from when the first scene was shot in 2009 to the final shot made in November of 2013. And since its completion, Armao took the film to several festivals where it racked up some awards. And you know what? I love this movie. And I know that I still have my usual 3 things that I like about a movie that I get to later in the episode. But I want to explain exactly why Jason pointed out the table and told me that I might want to stop by in the event that I didn't see the table that he saw. A handful of years before having any knowledge of Bloodsucka Jones, I saw a movie that I think is one of my very favorite movies of the entire 21st century up to this point. It's certainly one of my favorite comedies by far. And that's a movie called Black Dynamite. That was a movie that was made as an homage to blaxploitation flicks of the 70s. It particularly stuck to the movies like Dolomite, that had a fusion of a black hero who knows kung fu, an army of hookers, the man being the bad guy, and a guy who speaks in all rhymes. It's a movie that takes its homage seriously, but also has a lot of fun with jokes and broad comedic moments. Black Dynamite eventually ended up on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, where further adventures could happen. And I bring that up for two reasons. The first is that what I saw in Bloodsucka Jones as a character was very similar to Black Dynamite. If the comedy of the movie matches just 25% of Black Dynamite's, then it was probably going to be pretty great. Second, Bloodsucka Jones has the kind of comedy that I love, and that's the wackier sense of humor that fits with that Adult Swim format. A well-crafted one-liner or what have you is fine, but a situational joke or having a series of poor decisions or a series of dumb things done by kind of dumb people can definitely lead to big laughs. And that's what we have here, a movie full of irreverence and heroes pretty much incapable of doing anything right. Bloodsucka Jones is the tale of romance and pop-collared jerk guys who happen to be vampires and the mythical badass from comic books and by the name of the titular Bloodsucka Jones. Now, this movie opens with David, played by Armeo himself, meeting Jessica. After a month of dating, Jessica introduces David to her brother Stuart. And Stuart is a vampire and threatens David to break up with Jessica. Later, Jessica's friend, a vampire named Heather, makes the same threat. Each time he gets a threat, David just simply runs away. Christine herself is also a vampire, and the whole point is that basically in her family, when a vampire falls in love, that they, in order to become a full-fledged member of the family or the tribe or whatever, they have to kill that person, that first love that they have. Now, David's comic book guy hooks him up with Tony, who is supposedly the best vampire hunter in the world, but he's kind of an idiot. Most of the plans that they come up with are directly from Tony's Bloodsucka Jones comic book collection. When they discover a legendary sword that Stuart's vampire gang is after, they are about to get into some trouble with Heather and a couple of the other vampire goons, but Bloodsucka Jones actually arrives in the flesh with his trusty and very sexy sidekick Vanessa. Bloodsucka basically decides to train David and Tony. Now, you might think the combined awesomeness of Bloodsucka and Vanessa would make David and Tony badass vampire hunters, but they are completely hapless. And just before Bloodsucka reveals the greatest vampire hunting secret in his arsenal, he and Vanessa get kidnapped by Stuart and his goons. The vampires run wild and start feeding on everyone in town, and it's now up to David and Tony, the least heroic people ever, to deal with Stuart, stop the vampires, and save Bloodsucka Jones. So with that said, let's get to the three things that I like about Bloodsucka Jones. First, I positively love that every single person in this world is a complete idiot. Okay, well, maybe not everyone, since Jessica and Vanessa are basically competent characters, but just about everyone is a complete moron. Even Bloodsucka Jones is kind of only slightly smarter than David and Tony. The vampire gang is made up of your typical preppy jerks with polo shirts that they always have their collars popped, and to show his supremacy over the others, Stuart wears two polos. His number two, Kenny, is a total doofus. So this isn't so much a matter of wits, but a face-off of the witless. So imagine that everyone in a vampire movie like Dracula happens to be, I don't know, Homer Simpson, and you'd get the idea of what you're dealing with in this movie. Second, Preston Gant's Bloodsucka Jones is just fantastic. His delivery in the part is just great. He's mostly impersonating the typical blaxploitation type of hero. He acts like this badass with a sweet denim suit and that perfect afro. However, he is also kind of a goof too. Generally, he's a well-developed character as both the titular lead character, but also in his actual role as the supporting character. This is really David and Tony's movie. However, he gets used in little ways that are fantastic, and it's always the little things that can put a movie over the top. First, he's often used for transitions from one scene to the next. Sometimes he's spinning his way from one side of the screen to the other. Another, he's just strolling through with a smile and a transition, motherfucker. And in one of my favorite moments of his is when he, Vanessa, Tony, and David are facing off against Heather and a couple of goons that she brought, they're basically trying to figure out how the vampires can basically get this mystical sword or whatever. And she reveals that she has this army of little girl vampires, and the camera pulls right in on Bloodsucka Jones, and he shouts, "Run, motherfuckers, it's the children of the corn." It's just, it's so great because it's like every joke is not exactly set up. It just happens. And in that kind of comedy, and particularly from these characters, are just kill me. And it's just that type of comedy that I like, which that leads to my third thing. The entire movie is stitched together kind of like a Zucker and Abrams movie. It's a ton of jokes that just litter the movie. I've seen the movie multiple times, and I find myself laughing at not just the same jokes over and over, but finding new jokes to laugh at too. What is kind of fantastic is about how this movie works is that it's basically just an hour and 45 minutes comprised of shorter set pieces. The plot kind of meanders, but not in a bad way. It's like the jokes dictate the scenes as opposed to the other way around. And it's that thing that I discussed earlier where the comedy is similar to the Adult Swim strangeness. You start with the goofy characters and these things that these characters would say, and then build the circumstances around it. I really kind of hardly watch new comedies anymore. It's mostly because because I don't think I can ever really identify with characters because I'm a fairly goofy dude. And I don't mean that I'm goofier or funnier than any comedies being made these days, but I really mean it. I'm goofy. Most of what goes on inside my head is a goddamn cartoon. So I need movies like Bloodsucka Jones that think that same way that I do. And I'll eventually get to Bloodsucka Jones versus the Creeping Death from 2017, the sequel, the movie that I actually saw first. Armeo has said that he's planning, I think, 4 films total, with a third one that he's trying to ramp up for currently. So if he wants to make 20 of these things, I'll be along for the ride. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later. And don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure each and every Wednesday, and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday on filmseizure.com, as well as places where fine podcasts are found like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Spotify. You can also check out new posts at my website, bmovieenema.com, each and every Friday.